Please comment where you are watching in the world, and please comment your personal horror stories for us to share. Thank you. I'm not sure I believe in the paranormal, but this experience is something that I think of often, and I would like to share it. My dad had me at 70, as unusual as that is, so when I was 20 he was 90. He was sick and in bed, and we knew he was going to die soon. I used to visit him every day and stay with him all morning. At the time, his memory wasn't very good. He mixed up names and faces a lot. A week before he died, he told me that a while ago he bought me a dress and asked me to look inside his closet. His wife came to help me. My dad told us where to look, and we found a baby dress, size 3 to 6 months. I told him he must have bought this for one of his grandchildren or as a gift for someone else. He insisted that I have to take it. He kept saying, it's for her, take it, which at the time I thought meant that it was for me, referring to me as her, as he maybe didn't know who he was talking to. That day, I told him multiple times that this dress was not for me. He refused to listen. I took it home and never saw it again. I probably shoved it in some drawer and forgot about it. My dad died. I moved out. I got married. Years passed. Last April, my daughter was 3 months old. I opened the closet to pick her outfit for the day, and the dress was waiting there, folded, ready, still with the label on. Our cleaning lady said she found it somewhere in the room and put it there. I honestly don't know where she could have found it, as last time I saw it was literally 5 years ago. It's even stranger that the dress only showed up when she was already 3 months, which was the dress size. I was the one who packed everything when I moved out of my mom's house, and I was the one who packed everything again when we renovated with my husband. Never saw the dress apart from the day my dad gave it to me, and I know it might be foolish, but I think it was for her, as insane as it may sound. I think the dress was for my daughter. This was 12 years ago when I was 9 months pregnant with my son. I was sweeping the porch when I suddenly got this pain and thought for sure that I was in labor. So off we went to the hospital. I get all hooked up to the machines, and they tell me that I am in fact not in labor, and sent me home. Mind you, I was in excruciating pain. I couldn't sit, stand, or lay down. My fiancé rubbed me for an hour trying to get me to sleep, and finally I was out. I slept like a rock. I woke up semi on my side and see a little girl maybe 2 feet from the foot of my bed, just staring at me curiously like a child would. I'd say she was 8 or 9 years old. When I slightly adjusted my head to actually take it what I was seeing, she took off running like a child would that got caught doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. I was not hallucinating. I was not dreaming. I've never had sleep paralysis in my life. She reacted to me reacting to seeing her, and playfully took off running. It's something I will never forget. I remember I sat at my bed and looked over and saw my fiancé asleep and stayed up for my OB appointment. She wasn't dressed in old/vintage clothing. It was a baby blue nightgown. I don't remember her face. 100% true story. While I have my own similar experience with hearing an unnatural plea for help and calling it in, linked above, it certainly wasn't the scariest encounter. The scariest night of my life has to be when my husband and I went camping in the off-season and were basically hunted by a psychopath. Long story short, we had heard a horrific car accident while getting ready for bed in our tent. Super windy, dangerous road lead up to the camping areas, so we were immediately concerned about someone being in grave danger and potentially with children at that. Without a single word to each other, we hopped up and ran to the direction we heard the wreck take place. We got there the same time, just about as police, and ended up giving our info if needed, and heading back to our campsite. I was pretty pregnant at the time, so really had to pee after all the running and adrenaline. We decided to stop at the only restroom open at the time, which was a bit past our campsite, and incredibly dark without other campers around creating light. After I used the restroom, I'm walking back out to my husband, when I noticed behind him a flashlight frantically bouncing up and down from someone booking it towards the restroom. Jokingly, I chuckled about this guy must really be needing to use the bathroom, but it was a very short-lived moment. This man stopped dead in front of us and basically whispered, "Wow, you guys are fast," and then smiled in the most unnerving way. It absolutely sank my stomach immediately, heartbeat pounding in my ears, instant nausea, goosebumps, you name it. Husband didn't seem put off by any means, and noted we were worried about the accident ECT. Dude continues on as if discussing the weather with a friend, saying he's just used to that kind of stuff. Asks if we're leaving tomorrow. I almost angrily ask used to what, which he shrugged off and just explained he traveled a lot and camped. At that point, I had already started taking steps backwards to the point where my husband finally starts noticing something's off with at least me. In the moment, I decided to lie and say we needed to get back to our tent because the cops were coming to take our statements, which was completely false, but I for whatever reason just fabricated that like verbal vomit without even thinking. Even though my husband chimed in and agreed, saying we needed to get back, this man does not stop. He starts matching our steps backwards with steps forward towards us, and begins telling us that morning he went for a walk and found these beautiful flowers, but had heard a deep growl which scared him. He ended this very concerning story with saying he realized you never know what day is going to be your last. It was at that point that I realized the entire time he had been fiddling with his hands in his hoodie pocket because he had a knife. I screamed, "Run!" And without hesitation my husband grabbed my hand, and we started running for our lives. In those first few moments of taking off, he asked me what was going on, and I screamed, "Flowers don't growl," and started sobbing. This man had never taken the flashlight off us, had it in one of his hands by his hoodie pocket the whole encounter. So we knew he was chasing us when the flashing became erratic again, shining up and down over us. I'll never forget watching our shadows go from big to small from the movement of his hand while running hard. I looked back to see him behind us with the same smile he had in the beginning, and it absolutely terrified me. We had to cut through some woods because he was gaining on us so fast, and in the heat of the moment decided to just continue through the woods back to the police instead of staying on the road we would come up to after cutting through. We both looked back and last saw him right at the edge of the road where we would have came out if we had decided to take that way, because it would have been the fastest to the wreck. We knew we made the right decision immediately, and knew it was a life or death situation in that moment. It clicked for us that he had expected us to take the road, and looked disappointed that we took the longer route instead. We didn't see the flashlight or him after we looked forward again, and when we told police, they went and failed to find the guy. Fast forward to a couple years after this traumatic experience and dozens unsuccessful follow-up calls to see if they ever found him, I decided to post on TikTok about it. It went viral overnight, and by the next day someone who lived in the area had actually found this guy and shared a news article. He killed 2 weeks later at another campsite not too far from where we went. He attacked and stabbed a man who died immediately and a woman who luckily survived, but only by playing dead. When I tell you finding this out absolutely sent me into a spiral, I mean it. I cannot even remotely begin to describe the mixed emotions of getting closure from him having been found, to the heartbreak and survivor's guilt of knowing he went on to successful kill because he wasn't caught after our experience. This changed my life. I'll never be able to enjoy camping again, and we used to love it. To anyone bored enough to read all this, please, for the love of God, always go camping/hiking protected. Turns out, camping/hiking and murders are scarily common and seem to be a free-for-all to serial killers. Look up camping cold cases, and you will be blindsided by just how common. It was summertime, and I was like 16 standing in my kitchen making some food. Now my bedroom was directly above the kitchen and had a really creaky floor. No one else is home, and all of my animals were outside because it was a nice day out. I hear someone get off my bed, could hear the 2 footfalls, and start walking across the room to the stairs. In order to leave the kitchen, you had to walk past the doorway at the bottom of the stairs. I was following the footsteps as I walked across the kitchen when they make it to the top of the landing. As I made it to the doorway, all I hear is someone coming down the stairs. Fast. I booked it out of the house and waited outside for a while. Went inside, no one was there. Never saw a person leave the house, plus I was just up in my room, would have noticed a person in my room. There's nowhere to hide in the room. There's other stories, but that was what I remember clearly to this day. Now my cousin's story. I will start with my cousin's story. We are 9 and having a sleepover at my house. I was upstairs sleeping in my room, and she slept on the living room couch. Why she didn't stay in my room is a mystery. Things went normal in my book. We played games, ate snacks, stayed up late, and went to bed to wake up to pancakes. She goes home, and that's the end of the sleepover. A couple weeks go by, and I wanted her to come stay again. She wouldn't say yes to my request, which was confusing for me. My mom spoke with her mom, and it was decided I would have to go over there for any sleepovers as she was scared to sleep at my house. Never found out why in that moment, dumb kid brain, so off I went to her house. Fast forward to where I am like 14, and my cousin gets brought up. It turns out the reason she would not come over again is because while she was sleeping, I was being really creepy towards her and would just stare at her from my dining room in my white nightgown. Apparently, I would leave the room and rent her multiple times to just stand and stare at my cousin. The thing being, I don't own a white nightgown. I was wearing horse-themed PJs like pants and a shirt. When she saw me in the morning, she panicked because I wasn't wearing the same outfit, and when she went home, she told my aunt she didn't want to go back. So this is the start of the little girl that haunted my childhood home, at least for my knowledge it is. And now my brother's account. My older brother had the same room I did in the footsteps story when he was a kid. Upstairs there was 2 rooms. One was my brother's and the other was my parents'. The hallway between the rooms was very small. It was basically just the top landing of the stairs with a closet and the doors to rack room on either side. The right side was my brother's room, over the kitchen, and the left was my parents'. One night my mom woke up and could hear my brother whining in his room. He's like 7. So my mom creeps up to his door to listen and see if she can figure out what is going on. She can hear him saying, "Stop, I want to go to bed. I'm tired and I don't want to play anymore." Within this bedroom door is a crack that you could see through. Hearing this, she looks through the crack and can see his bed shaking, as if someone is pushing it or jumping on it while he was sitting on the bed. Not moving, just looking tired and cranky. Mom opens the door and boop, it stops. Later on they figure out she's, the ghost girl, likes a specific teddy bear of Jim's. They would continue to find this bear all around the house in random places that my brother swears he never moved it. Tied into my brother's story, my dad comes home from work, and as he is sitting in the living room, he hears Jim's upstairs door slam. He goes to check it out, thinking my brother got home from school and had a bad day. He walks up the stairs and sees the door closed. He opens it and asks if my brother is doing okay. The door slams back shut in his face, and no person is in sight. My brother comes home from practice a half hour later. This begins the appearance of a sketchy presence that we do not think is the little girl. My brother comes home and also heard his door close. This time he looks up the stairs and says, "Dad." He saw a large back outline of a figure that he thought was my dad. It turned as was looking down, presumed to be from how it moved. My brother got an overwhelming feeling of dread and went to run away. As he made his move, he could hear, again, loud thundering footsteps follow after him. In his panic, he went for the stairs to our remodeled basement. When he hit the landing and turned around, nothing was there. Flash forward to where my brother has moved out, and I am in the room. I forgot about this story. I was 17 or 18 and was laying in my bed after taking a shower. The way the room was set up, my door couldn't open all the way as it would hit my bed, the same bed my brother used. I had a dog and cat at the time. My dog was big, like 110 pounds, so she would push the door open and then get trapped on one side of the room because she would push the door all the way open. So I'm laying there chilling, listening to music in my headphones after the shower, and I feel the bed shake. No biggie thought was my dog coming in and laying down. I look up at the door. It's only open 3 inches. How I left it when I came upstairs. I lay back down thinking I feel asleep and did the twitch thing, or my cat came up and decided to get down off the bed. Go back to laying with my eyes closed and I feel it again. My bed get pushed and like shake me. I get up determined to find the cat as my door is still not opened enough for the dog to have come in. There's no cat. I freak and leave to go downstairs, find both my cat and dog outside. Little side story. My other brother brings a random dog home, and of course he comes to sleep in my room with my dog as my other brother isn't home. This dude ground not stop growling at one corner of my bedroom. I had to take him to my parents' room so I could sleep with panicking. I'm not sure anymore if this is a ghost story. Many years ago, my wife and I were going to a memorial service for a co-worker of hers at a church in Estes Park, Colorado. She was an avid Ghost Hunters TV show viewer and had paranormal interests and such, so I suggested we make it an adventure and rent a haunted room in the Stanley Hotel for that night. It was all arranged. We were going to bring voice recorders and cameras. After the service, we got to the hotel a little early, before the check-in time, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We went to check in, and we were told the room was ready, and we should get our bags, take the old elevator to the 4th floor, go down the hallway to the left to our room. We did, and as we got off the elevator, I looked down the hallway to the right, and thought it was odd that there was a woman standing, watching 2 kids seemingly playing some sort of game right in the middle of the hallway. It caught my attention for just a second as we continued left to our room. We had plenty of time for her to go shopping in Estes and get some dinner at the Stanley, before we had a ghost tour of the hotel around 9 p.m. We did have one of the haunted rooms, and while we were inside, a tour did come by, and they stopped outside the door, and we could hear the description by the guide about how the fourth floor was where the children were watched during the heydays of the Stanley. Our room was haunted by a small boy. Very cool, everything was going perfect for her. I felt good about suggesting it. Eventually it comes time for our ghost tour. It was pretty good-sized group, and I would generally stay in the back so folks more interested in the stories than I was could hear better. Eventually we got to a room on the tour on the fourth floor, right next to the old elevator. I am out of the bunch looking around, and I look at the other hallway, and it is completely blocked off with plastic and caution tape. So now while the guide is talking, I am staring at the old elevator and realize there is only two ways to go when you get off the elevator: left to the hall where our room was, or go right to the hall where I saw the kids playing, as in go right to the hall that was blocked off to entering or seeing down it. So I pull my wife out as the group is ready to move on, and ask her if this is the elevator we came in on. She says yes, it's the only one. I asked if she looked this way when we got off. She said no, we were told to go left. As we are standing there with me trying to get things straight, a worker comes out from behind the plastic, so I ask him about the plastic. It had been blocked off for about a week as the rooms were getting some renovations. I looked behind the plastic and indeed, the hallway was littered with debris, tools and supplies. I went a few years thinking I had seen some Stanley Hotel ghosts at 2 in the afternoon hours before I even realized it. But it finally sank into me that how could I see ghosts in a hallway that wasn't the hallway as it actually existed that day. Another story here for you. Back around 2014, I was a nanny to a little boy around 4 years old. His sister would come home from school in the evening, and I'd have them both until around 4 or 5 p.m. There were strange experiences in the house involving the kids, but the two that I personally experienced involved the girl who was 10. Now I am 5 feet 6 inches, and she was the same height as me with feet roughly the same size as mine, 9. One afternoon I was preparing the boys' lunch, and I dropped a piece of food on the floor in front of the counter. Now the front of the counter met with a short bit of wall that opened to the bathroom doorway to the right. When I bent to pick up the piece of food, there were a pair of purplish-gray little girls' shoes sticking out of that piece of wall, as if a girl around 6 to 7 years of age was standing directly inside of the wall with the toes of her shoes poking out. I about fainted from fear. Another day when both kids were home. Oldest was probably on school break, I don't remember. The boy was sitting on the couch and the girl had her backside perched on the edge of the kitchen table in the dining room. The living and dining rooms were one open space, and they were engrossed in a cartoon. I stepped into the bathroom to wash my hands after blowing my nose, leaving the bathroom door ajar. I happened to glance up into the mirror and saw the girl walk to the counter in the kitchen behind me. I turned around to ask her what she was doing, and she wasn't there. I walked into the living room, and she was still at the table watching TV. I asked her what she'd been doing in the kitchen, because she'd clearly been by the sink, and she said she hadn't been in there. When their mom and I had a chance to talk the next morning, I told her about seeing her daughter in the kitchen and what had happened. Her eyes got huge, and she proceeded to tell me about the time they'd had a house full of family visiting, and all the kids were outside playing while the adults were inside talking. She very clearly saw her daughter come inside and walk to the kitchen counter. She called over to ask her daughter what she needed. Her mother-in-law was sitting in a different spot with a clearer view of the counter, and asked her who she was talking to, and the mom said her daughter had just walked in. The mother-in-law said, "Babe, nobody's in there." "Yes, she is. I just watched her go over to the sink." "Babe, go look. She's not in there." Sure enough, the kitchen was empty, and the kids were still running around outside. I know this sounds fantastical and wild, and I agree. This is in fairly remote backcountry West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by 2 of us, but the worst parts by all 4. This led to all 4 of us at some point battling personal issues in our lives that I believe stemmed directly from this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory, and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. When I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. History of immediate, 1 square mile, area, mother and son drowning in the creek nearby. Drug dealers killed in state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation as a friend group of 4, just to do something one last time before we all went our separate ways in life. This is private property on the backside of a big hill around which the creek flows in a huge, several-mile-long bend. Camp set up, fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat on the creek bank, maybe 20 yards away from camp, spotlighting fish in the water. We began to hear a rhythmic slosh of what sounded like someone wading through the water, maybe halfway up their shin deep. So we shined the light around upstream. We then spotted the symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbance made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet/legs sloshing towards us. When we would turn our spotlight off, it would start. It would stop when illuminated. It was reacting to us, and this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment. We knew this was not fish, and could not rationalize what was happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided best to keep it to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make it to where we were on the bank, and the noise stopped. Given the speed we witnessed it moving, and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank we were on in the amount of time it took us to get back to camp. Others at the camp heard it as well, and figured we had either gotten in, or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off. It sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we all saw the tall grass disturbed as something we couldn't see ran around the foliaged perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. This could have been an animal, but it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear if that matters. At first it sounded garbled, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds we could make out the words saying, "We shouldn't be there, and we needed to leave," before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously this was terrifying, and at first we thought there was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp, and that is dangerous. We were all frozen with fear, but then adrenaline hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all 4 of us saw a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us, and it just sort of hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet. The legs ended in sort of wavy lines like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and it zipped like the flash back towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it turned over sluggishly as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with, who I didn't know knew this area, told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place he didn't check traps alone at night. He said it was almost like the animals leave that place at night. No less than a month later, my uncle, who owns the property, was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point the dog was on a rock face up above him and knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV and turned it around and drove himself out of there. It wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story makes it rounds on the local Facebook groups, that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but he is a salt of the earth, hunting, farming, working man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. Honest, funny, just an incredibly stand-up guy. He is easygoing but also no nonsense. In his text to my mother he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. The man in the hat the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on my ATV and get me turned around. Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the shadow man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us we need to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous, although I have no idea what could have been scarier than that." Over a year ago, I lived through one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. not because of what I saw, but because of what someone else had done. It all started when I was forced to move out of my apartment due to a mold infestation that had gotten completely out of control. The mold wasn't just an inconvenience, it was making people sick. You could feel it in your throat when you breathed, like the air itself was contaminated. The management, of course, did the absolute bare minimum to address it, just enough to check the legal boxes, but it was nowhere near enough to make the place livable. So like many of my neighbors, I had no choice but to leave. The move was an absolute nightmare. Mold spores had embedded themselves into nearly everything I owned, and cleaning or tossing my belongings became a grueling, heartbreaking process. Anything porous, couches, mattresses, rugs, was a lost cause. Even things I thought I could save, like books or clothes, had to be carefully scrubbed or thrown out after hours of agonizing over whether they'd ever be truly safe to keep. It was overwhelming. The sheer amount of effort it took to sort through my life, piece by piece, deciding what was salvageable and what had to go, left me feeling hollow. Most of my belongings didn't make the cut. I lost almost everything. Thankfully, my sister-in-law, let's call her Sarah, offered to help. I was grateful for the company, especially since the whole ordeal felt so isolating and sad. Sarah's the kind of person who brings a calming presence to tense situations, so having her there made things a little more bearable, at least at first. We started late one evening, sorting through boxes and furniture, working our way through the mold-tainted wreckage of my life. The apartment was dimly lit because most of the lamps had already been packed or tossed. The air felt heavy, not just with moisture from the mold, but with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Still, I chalked it up to exhaustion and the stress of the situation. Sarah, on the other hand, started acting a little off. I noticed her frowning as she moved through the rooms, her expression shifting from focused to uneasy. At one point, while we were sorting through a box in my bedroom, she suddenly stopped, rubbed her arms like she was cold, and said, "I don't know what it is, but this place feels wrong." "Yeah, well, toxic mold will do that to you," I joked. I didn't think much of it at the time. The apartment did feel gross, but I figured it was just the combination of the smell, the dampness, and the stress of losing so much. Sarah nodded, but her discomfort didn't go away. In fact, as the night wore on, it seemed to get worse. Every now and then, she'd glance over her shoulder like she'd heard something, or she'd pause mid-sentence and stare down the hallway. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd just shake her head and say, "Nothing. Probably just my imagination." Eventually, she suggested we move out to the porch to finish going through the remaining boxes. It was brighter out there, and honestly, I was glad for the fresh air. We worked quietly for a while, but every so often, Sarah would go back inside to grab a tool or another box. The third or fourth time she came back out, she looked pale. Her hands were shaking slightly as she set the box down. "I think I saw something," she said, her voice unsteady. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Like a mouse?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Something. I don't know. A shadow. It moved." My first instinct was to brush it off. It was late, we were tired, and the dim lighting inside could easily play tricks on your eyes. But Sarah looked genuinely shaken. She tried to laugh it off, saying she was probably just imagining things, but I could tell she didn't believe that herself. I didn't want to make her feel worse, so I suggested we wrap up for the night. We'd already done a lot of work, and there wasn't much left to sort through anyway. As we were loading the last of the boxes into the car, Sarah froze. I'll never forget the way her face changed. One moment, she was fine, and the next, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and whispered, "Look in the window. You don't see that." I turned to look, my heart starting to race. But when I stared into the darkened window of my apartment, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the faint reflection of the streetlights and the outline of the empty room beyond. "I don't see anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her grip on my arm tightened. "How do you not see that? It's right there." Her voice was trembling now, and when I looked at her, I saw tears in her eyes. Sarah isn't the kind of person who scares easily. She's always been level-headed, practical, the type to laugh off ghost stories. But in that moment, she looked absolutely terrified. She said it was a shadow figure, clear as day, standing in the window and watching us. She couldn't see its eyes, but she said she could feel it staring, like it was aware of us, watching. I didn't know what to say. I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything, but her fear was so real, so visceral, that I couldn't help but feel spooked myself. We climbed into the car as quickly as we could, and as we drove away, Sarah kept glancing back at the apartment. She said the shadow figure was still there, tracking us with its face as we passed by. I didn't look. I didn't want to. The car ride was silent, except for the sound of our breathing. Sarah was still trembling, clutching her hands tightly in her lap, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. I asked if she was okay, and all she said was, "I've never seen anything like that before." She pulled out her phone and started reciting prayers, Saint Michael, among others. And though I wasn't particularly religious, I found myself joining in just to feel like we were doing something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment Sarah grabbed my arm, the look on her face, the tears in her eyes. I'd had my own strange, possibly paranormal experiences before, but this was different. This wasn't something I'd seen or felt myself. It was something I'd witnessed through someone else's fear. And somehow, that made it even scarier. What had she seen? Why couldn't I see it? And why did it feel like, even now, the memory of that shadow was still lingering, just out of sight? I don't know if it was the mold, the stress, or something else entirely that made Sarah see what she saw that night. That night, as much as I tried to shake it off, I couldn't help but feel like we hadn't left that shadow figure behind. Like maybe somehow it had followed us. This happened to me 7 years ago, and I never really got any answers. All I know is that it has completely changed the way I view the world. I figure it's time to share my story, and see if someone else on here has had a similar experience. I'd love to answer any questions because I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 18 years old, and I was with my family visiting my brother, who was studying abroad in Rotterdam. Just for reference, we were staying at the Hilton in Rotterdam. One night, we went to dinner, and my mom discovered I had gotten a new tattoo on the back of my neck. She started making mean comments about it, and making fun of me to everyone at dinner. I got the tattoo for my father, and my mom and I had a bad relationship, so I didn't feel comfortable telling her it was for my dad in front of all these people. I got upset, and ended up leaving dinner early, and went back to the hotel to cool off. On my way back, I had some anxiety thinking about how my mom was never going to accept me, and that even 5,500 miles away from home, I still felt trapped and would never have a good relationship with my mother. It was a bit more anxiety than usual, but nothing over the top, and I got over it like I always do. My family finally got back to the hotel room, and we watched some TV before going to bed. My parents went to sleep in their room, my brother was on a cot in the main TV room, and I slept on the couch in the same room. 5 minutes after turning the lights off, I laid in bed facing toward the back of the couch, just thinking about the night. I rolled over toward the outside of the couch, and to my surprise I see a woman standing through the small part of the couch. She had blonde hair, which was pulled back with 2 little strands framing her face. She was wearing a beautiful white spaghetti strap dress, and she was really pretty. I thought she looked about 25 to 28. She was transparent, standing through the couch, glowing, I can't remember if it was blue or white, and grinning at me softly. She was standing about 2 feet away from me, just staring. Right when I saw her, I was shocked. I was in no way religious, and I did not believe in ghosts or anything, but that of course changed the moment I saw her. I knew not to scream because I've learned from horror movies how that ends. So I stayed quiet and just stared at her for 15 seconds, just thinking to myself, I can't believe this is happening to me. She then let out a little giggle, as if she was amused by me being so in shock. Then she turned to the side and took 2 steps off, then disappeared. As if that wasn't crazy enough, as soon as she disappeared, the most intense euphoric feeling overwhelmed me. I felt unexplainable peace. I didn't even have the capability to question anything that was happening. It's like it wasn't even me anymore, but just this unbelievable sense of security and love. I had no fears, not even a sense of self. It felt like I was floating. Now, as if that wasn't crazy enough, an idea popped in my head, but it wasn't my idea. I hate to use this word, but it's as if the ghost telepathically said to me, "You're okay, you're safe, I'm watching you, now go to sleep." I was still in this incredible trance that I didn't question what was going on. I just remember thinking to myself, okay, and then rolled over and went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, recalled the events, and immediately told my parents. I didn't have any alcohol or any substances. I was totally awake and not tired by any means, and I'm completely mentally stable. If this helps, I have done some drugs since this experience, and nothing will ever come close to what I saw and felt that day. I am very doubtful it was a hallucination. It was exceptionally real to me. I just need to know what it means or what it was, or if anyone else has experienced anything similar, or how I can maybe see if she could come back. It was the most profound experience, and I feel fortunate to have experienced it, because it has now made me pretty damn open-minded, haha. A story on top of this. A freakout delayed by years. I was taking turns riding a giant stuffed animal down a set of stairs with my sister at my aunt's house. When I went up after taking one of the many rides down, I noticed an old woman just sitting on the rocking chair at the top of the staircase, rocking very slowly. I had a 3/4 view a mere feet away. I quietly crept back down the stairs, so I would not disturb her. I was not scared, only surprised as she was not there a mere moment ago. I was a small child, and I just figured it was someone else in the house. Years later, I told the story to my mom. I described to her exactly what I saw, an old woman, wearing a dark dress with lace, silver hair pulled back tight in a bun, rocking slowly. My mom was dumbfounded. I had just described my aunt's mother in detail, and I had never met her or even seen a picture of her. I was immediately creeped out. I can still see her in my mind like it was yesterday. Bonus story. In that same house, which was built in the 1800s, I was staying in a bedroom on the top floor. Yes, the same floor where I saw my aunt's mom. Being at the top and floor, and having no attic, the ceiling slanted inward from a wall about 4 foot high on each side of the room. On one of the walls there was one of those half-height doors. Well, one night, that creepy-ass door started knocking, and the handle was being shaken in a way someone would try open a lock or stuck door. During that incident, I was old enough to be absolutely terrified. That door by itself, without that happening, is creepy on a new level. My aunt did have a special needs daughter that lived in the house and died at a very young age. I grew up in a haunted house. I have dozens of stories, as do my parents and sister. My parents do not believe in such things, but they will tell you what they experienced. I am a full-grown man, and I get the jeebies going there at night by myself. My kids and I used to spend the night and ghost hunt when my parents would travel. And yes, we were scared, and we did have some events happen. So my girlfriend and her friends invited me to stay at a small cabin Airbnb in the Appalachian Mountains near Seven Devils. The idea was just to go up there to enjoy some snow tubing, and then some light drinking, hot tub, and board games in the cabin afterwards. So the cabin was pretty high up in the mountain, and the drive up to it was kinda scary. Single car length road for the most part, no railings on the side of the road. So if you were on the side of the truck, which we'd rented a 4WD to make the drive up, thank goodness, it was a sheer drop on that side. Sure, if we drove off the road, we'd likely be stopped by some trees on the way down, but still a bit nerve-wracking. Another thing was some of the trees on the trail had faces on them for decoration. I think they were supposed to look cute, but they just looked kinda unnerving for most of us. I really should have taken pictures, but was too anxious during the climb. The cabin itself was almost at the top of the mountain, and fairly small. A small living room with a very tiny and narrow kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Hot tub on the lower porch because the cabin itself was basically on the 2nd floor, so you had to go up a stairway to get into it. Key to the cabin was in a lockbox, so no special door lock option, just an old-fashioned cabin. We came back after snow tubing and dinner. The others drank enough to get buzzed whilst I only had a glass of wine, since I have a condition that makes it dangerous to get too much alcohol in my system, so relatively sober. Enjoyed the hot tub as planned, witnessed a beautiful shooting star, then played board games after that until around 1 a.m., and we all went to bed. I woke up a little after 4 a.m. because I was suddenly sweating, and then I felt kinda unsettled. Decided I needed to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I left the bedroom and nothing seemed amiss, so I used the bathroom. When I left the bathroom, the front door was wide open. Naturally, I felt immediately uneasy. But again, this was a small cabin, so there was nowhere for any intruder to hide. I could easily see the entire interior of the cabin from the tiny hallway. I decided maybe the last person through the door last night after the hot tub didn't fully close the door and lock it appropriately, because there is a sign by the door that says "Close door firmly," and it was fairly windy outside. I mean, that wind was howling out there. So I go over to the door and close it, making sure that it's firmly enough in the doorway to fully lock it. I even jiggle the handle a few times and try to see if it'll open when locked. It doesn't budge, so I start to head back to the room. Then I hear the door rattle a little bit, and I turn around and stare at it. I watch the lock itself turn, and then the door opens, and it doesn't slam open from the wind. It just slowly swung open. I stayed extremely still, because of course that was crazy. The door has a huge, clear window on it with no curtains, and a big window beside it that also doesn't have curtains, and there was absolutely no one on the other side of it. There's no way someone could have ducked out of view either, and hurried away from the door after pushing it open either, because they would have had to make a lot of noise hurrying down the steps to get off the walkway. Like I said, it was an old-fashioned door as well with a simple lock and knob, no electronic buttons or anything to unlock or lock by buttons or remotely. After getting the nerve to close the door again and locking it firmly, nothing else happened that night. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was just too scared to do so. The following morning I told the others about it and they were pretty spooked too, but otherwise glad we were only staying that one night. Before we packed up the truck to leave, there was this strange knocking noise coming from the surrounding woods. Not like someone knocking on a wall or door. It was a deep, hollow-sounding knock that only knocked twice, stopped for a while, and then would do it again. Maybe it was just trees knocking together, but after what happened early in the morning like that, it was a little unsettling. So yeah, I'm from Florida, and though I've experienced other paranormal activity before, that was the most physical thing I've experienced before, and I've definitely heard plenty of stories about odd occurrences in the Appalachians. In a way, I'm glad I experienced something, but I'll never forget the fear I felt. After all, my first thought was an intruder or something, and it would have been pretty bad being up there so high by ourselves. If we'd had any reason to run, we could have easily fallen off a cliff or something in the pitch-black darkness outside. So it was back in 2020 me and my wife just had our first baby. She was old enough to sleep in her crib alone in her room with the occasional midnight wake up for a bottle. On this night, I woke up to her crying for her bottle. I got out of bed, went to her room, which was right across from ours. Still half asleep, and it was pitch black in her room. I shit you not. When I made it to her crib, I saw her laying in the middle with her blanket and empty bottle. Again pitch black, but we do this every night. In the corner of her crib, something moved. It caught my eye. In a quick glance in the dark, I could make out a ducking cat. I blinked, and it was gone. I rubbed my eye to try and focus a little better to see what I had thought moved, but the shape was gone now. But I kid you not, I seen a black and white cat. I had told myself sleepless night, and in the dark half asleep, that I was seeing things. Made a joke to my wife that we had a ghost cat. Didn't think anything about it. I'm allergic to cats. We don't have one, nor did we have a stray near our house. Never told any else about this incident. About a year later, my mom came over and was talking to my wife as they walked through the house. We had a big German shepherd inside the house sometimes. As my mom walked through the kitchen, in the corner of her, she saw a dark figure laying on the ground. As she was walking through, you can see all the way down the hall, in the few steps that are visible from the kitchen. She said in her mind she saw the figure and was like, oh, it's the dog. But wait, the dog was in the basement cause the baby was out. She described a black and white cat laying in the floor in the hallway, and it getting up and running to the end of the hallway, right where my baby's room was. So yeah, my house has a black and white cat that watches my daughter sleep. Another story from me to share with you. I've had quite a few experiences happen to me. One I've posted before, and pretty much no one believed me. I got called names, mentally ill, or people said I most likely had a seizure. I have never had a seizure. I'm not mentally ill. But the weirdest thing to have ever happened to me was I once came home early from work one day. I started doing the dishes. I was in a good mood since I had a half day at work, so I was so excited to be home early, and then make plans with my boyfriend and friends to go out that night. I was energized and excited to get ready to go out. My boyfriend calls me. Last thing I remember was after our conversation was over, I was looking at my phone. Then the weirdest shit happened to me, and I cannot forget this. I remember looking up, and I see a very short lady in my apartment wearing all black. I remember she was ducking down trying to hide behind my bar stools, but I could see her. I remember being completely frozen. I could not physically move at all. Then all of a sudden, it was like I woke up from a trance. Standing still in my kitchen holding my cell phone, not understanding what had just happened or how long I had been standing there for. My cell phone needed to restart. My stove timer was blinking on and off as if the electricity had stopped briefly. I felt extremely tired and exhausted and needed to go immediately lay down. After taking a nap, and woke up and shot up out of bed all of a sudden just remembering I had seen a lady in my kitchen. Except I knew at this point this lady would most likely not be there as I had taken a nap. I looked around my apartment trying to look for signs of a break-in, and I remember feeling so extremely confused, scared and violated that someone was in my apartment. I wanted to call the cops but knew no one would believe me, because I had taken a nap. That's what led me to thinking that whoever I saw, or whatever I saw, was probably a ghost or something paranormal. This happened years ago. Just recently, I woke up and found cat food in my hallway on the floor, as if someone just placed cat food on the floor to feed my cats. My cats eat in bowls, not on the floor. I have no idea how that could have possibly happened. It wasn't a hairball or cat vomit either. It was a handful of cat food just in the middle of the floor. I don't sleepwalk either. I'm not sure why, but I've had strange things happen throughout my life. This happened 6 years ago, and I only talked about it once, but since so many years have passed, I feel somewhat comfortable at least talking/typing about it now. I'm typing this on my phone, so I apologize for the weird formatting. Also TW for animal death. To give some context and background, I'm native and I live on a reservation. In mid-2018, my grandfather got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, after finally calling us on the 3rd day of him not being able to eat or drink anything. He didn't like doctors or hospitals. Once he was hospitalized, he asked us to move into his house so we could take care of it, also so we could take care of him once he got back from treatment for small visits. I should also state that my grandfather/his wife passed in 2015 due to lung cancer. My grandparents own a large piece of land, since they used to have a farm when my mom was younger. Weird things have happened over the years. My mom and her siblings saw some weird-ass shit around the property. Youngest sibling saw a naked man crawling on the road during a thunderstorm, and they disappeared. My mom and her eldest saw a humanoid wolf pushing a baby stroller. There's a stroller in the woods still. Moving on now that I elaborated a bit. It's been a few months since we moved into our grandparents' house. Ever since our grandfather got hospitalized, we were pretty settled in at this point. So, my mom brought home KFC because she didn't feel like cooking that night, and she invited our cousin over to join us. After we finished eating, I went out onto the deck. This is where I saw something black on the ground, and I thought it was shoe or piece of clothing at first. So, obviously I walked down the ramp to get a better look at what it was, and it was a severed dog head. I got worried and obviously went back inside to tell my mom. At first she was like, "There's a bear in the area, poor puppy." But I was like, "No, this is a severed dog head." My oldest sibling went out to check, while me, my mom, and our cousin stood on the deck, and my older sibling confirmed that it was a dog's head. It was a medium-sized dog that had black fur. My sibling looked at it a bit more and commented that the cut looks too clean to have been a bear. A bear would have obliterated it. At this point the wind started to pick up, and my mom obviously got nauseous and went back inside. So we're all on edge, and my cousin calls her mom, who's a medicine woman, and she comes dressed in full medicine man attire and has all her shit with her. She starts to bless us, before moving on to blessing the inside of the house. I should add that the house is 2 stories, so there's like 4 steps to get into the dining/kitchen area, followed by steps that lead to the basement on the right side. So picture a small closed entryway with another door at the top. So me, my 3 siblings, and our mom is standing in that entryway to let her do her thing. While she's moving into the living room, something fucking runs towards the hallway towards the bedrooms. There's a wind chime that decorates the hallway. So we knew what direction that fucker went. Honestly, I was scared shitless at this point, and my younger siblings were on the verge of crying. Our cousin's mom finishes blessing the inside of the house, and she moves on to blessing around the house and property line. She got rid of the dog head and told us to sleep in the living room that night and to cover all the windows so nothing could see inside. She also told us not to mention or acknowledge what happened, because whatever put that severed dog head there obviously wanted attention, and it got it. So, we slept in the living room. I couldn't sleep at all and just watched movies all night. In the morning we moved our beds back to our rooms, though my mom was hesitant obviously, and we never talked about it after that. I also forgot to mention that the dog's head was pointed towards our eldest sibling's window/bed. They slept in the basement, so whatever the fuck it was didn't like them and deliberately put it there. Our oldest sibling attracts the weirdest shit, and none of us know why TBH. Out of my 3 siblings, I'm the only one who physically sees stuff/hears. There's so much weird shit I've seen growing up, and most of it was connected to our dad. Fuck that guy. They do as well, but it's every once in a blue moon. Here's a small list of stuff to end this post off. Multiple dark, shadowy figures and animals or animal-looking creatures, full-body apparitions or people. Something like to scratch at the walls during the night when our dad yelled at us. He was physically and mentally abusive. It was almost always where his bed was voices, like muffled conversation, but nothing could ever be made out, always a man and woman's voice. The thing that mimicked our dad, a skinless man, an owl man, he was an omen. Basically, he appeared 2 years after our grandmother found out she had lung cancer, but she kept it to herself and never told anyone until she was hospitalized. Guy who was dressed in a white suit with a white hat, but his face was always obscured by the doorframe because he was taller than it. Only knew that fucker had a hat because he bent down to look at me fucking skinwalker. Type thing that my dad brought to the house from his parents' house. He lived in the hills, and there's weird ass shit up there, bear looking thing that stood upright, little people, weird auras / lights around objects. I worked prior to the pandemic, at a cafe that was part of an old hotel. I would never say that I felt creeped out, so I don't chalk this up to any kind of feeling that might influence what I saw. Hell, I don't even have a strong belief in ghosts. Anyway, we have a front of house dining space and a back of house kitchen area. Next to the kitchen entrance, there is a hall that leads to the bathrooms and around to the hotel's front desk. It was a slow afternoon, so I went back to talk with the kitchen staff. I was leaning against the doorway, half in the kitchen, half in the hallway. I wasn't planning on staying long, so my attention was split between keeping an eye on the dining room and talking to people in the kitchen. While I'm talking, I register movement out of the corner of my eye, which seemingly involuntarily got me to look over my should and quickly follow a gentleman as he walked past me down the hall. My attention quickly went back to looking into the kitchen and then immediately back to the hall. But when I looked back, nobody was there. In my mind, I immediately felt like this was odd. I should have still seen someone either moving down the hall towards the hotel front desk, or would have seen one of the bathroom doors closing slowly because of the hydraulics. Since I saw neither, I felt compelled to investigate and rule out several possibilities while I had the opportunity to do so. So I walked down the hall towards the front desk, nobody there, and opened both bathroom doors, nobody inside. It is highly unlikely that someone of that age could have gotten out of the building without me seeing them in the time that I acted. They would have had to have started to full-on run to get through the lobby and out the door. And having worked in this space for more than 3 years, I have never encountered an adult that spontaneously decided to sprint to the door and run away. The weird thing about it is that the image in my mind of the man felt and feels more like an imprint, like it was memory as it happened, as opposed to me actually seeing it with my eyes. If that makes any sense. But it is so clear that it couldn't have simply been a light trick or shadow or whatever. I can still imagine a very clear person. I can say what they were wearing, how tall they were, and likely their average age, based on clothing, how they held themselves, and how they walked. It was one of the more weird things I've encountered. Similar encounter here from a friend. That's pretty creepy. I have also experienced something strange that I have not told anyone, even my wife. I recently had a career change in the past year and decided to get my security guard license and started working at a condominium last year. This condo isn't that old. It was built in 1994. However, a lot of the residents that live here are very old. In the condo we have a swimming pool, hot tub, and sauna. Everyone loves the amenities, but due to COVID all of our amenities are closed. When I started working here last year, I had a very friendly elderly gentleman who would always come exactly at 10:30 p.m. Pool closes at 11 p.m. to use the sauna by himself, and at 10:55 p.m. he would buzz me to say bye through the camera as he left through the back doorway. This nice man passed away peacefully in his sleep in December, right after Christmas. For the last 3 weeks at 10:55 p.m. the back doorway buzzer started buzzing, but there is nothing on the camera. I reported it to the building super, and he checked it out, and he said that it had some dust that needed to be cleaned out, but otherwise it was fine. The buzzing continued for another 3 days, then it stopped, and I haven't heard it for 2 weeks. The bathrooms that the security team uses is the change room bathrooms for the pool area, and in the men's room is where the sauna is located. All amenities are locked, and only employees of condo have keys. Around 10:25 p.m. I had to poop, and I take like 10-minute poops minimum. I was in the stall, and right at 10:33 I hear the big wooden door of the sauna open and close. I wiped my ass so fast I got rug burn, pulled up my pants, and ran the F out to the front desk where I sit. Ever since then I use the women's room. This experience has my whole family in chills, and we need a rational explanation for it. It happened on last Christmas. My grandparents' house is in middle of the woods. Our whole family has this yearly get-together kind of thing during Christmas. We were preparing dinner, and my aunt was taking a nap. She started screaming, twitching, and woke up in cold sweat. She started mumbling nonsense about seeing visions of mangled toddlers creepily smiling and walking towards her. We thought she went crazy until it was bedtime. My grandfather crawled into his bed to go to sleep when he suddenly started to hear a toddler's voice saying, "Mama, mama." According to him, the voice started to progress and got louder. "There are no kids in our house." My grandfather's house is also in middle of nowhere between the woods. That means we do not have neighbors close by either. My cousin, who was scrolling his phone while sitting on the toilet, started to hear this same sound around the same time grandfather heard it. The toilet is at far right of the house and grandfather's room is at far left. So there is no way both of them could have heard voice from different directions at the same time. My mother and myself were sharing a bed that day, and she woke up to the voices of a toddler giggling and saying, "Mama." Our dog, an 8-month-old lab, was barking and growling crazily that night. It was so not like him. That furry dude is friendly with anyone and everyone. Same thing happened to my uncle, father, dad, and grandmother, and all of them woke up to the sounds of a supposedly cursed toddler. The weirdest part being them hearing the sound from different parts of the woods. Now I am a terrific sleeper, and I was oblivious to the situation until my cousin yeeted me out of my sleep. We all grabbed a bunch of flashlights and searched all around the area, but found nothing. It resulted in a midnight family meeting with my grandmother claiming that it was her deceased son, who died as a toddler, coming to see her. My uncle claiming it was the work of a thief. My aunt too saying it was her deceased baby brother showing his rage, as we forgot to light a candle on his grave last year. My grandfather saying it was a wild animal, and so on. We almost forgot about this experience until recently when we visited the house, and were awakened by footsteps and some kind of soft murmurs. My aunt and uncle were saying they kept on hearing something rolling on the roof for days prior to this experience. I do not believe in your typical ghosts, aka the vengeful, white-robed woman with pale skin and black hair looking for revenge. I hope to get a rational explanation for the experience. Has anyone had any similar experiences? Share your opinions about what it could have been. Although I do not strongly believe in ghosts, as of now, I am willing to learn about their possible existence. Also, I do not think there are any supposedly cursed objects in the house other than a copy of The Crying Boy. A story from my family member next to share. A few years ago, I was living in a house with a bunch of activity. Every night I was woken by knocking and scratching on the wall behind my head, despite that wall not connecting to a neighbor. I put this down to animals, but it spooked me a bit. Then my cat started acting strange around the wardrobe in our bedroom. It was there when we moved in, and she would sit and stare at it for hours, occasionally moving to stick her face down the side of it and meow. We moved the wardrobe, expecting to find a dead mouse or something of that nature, but there was nothing there. Just an old makeshift cane/rod that I'd like to believe was only used in a playful way and not as a genuine punishment for someone. We put the cane back, but after that our toddler started waking up screaming in the night and pointing in terror at the ceiling in her room, saying "man there" over and over. We moved her bed into our room after the third time this happened. One night I was laying in bed about to go to sleep when I heard someone downstairs. I panicked, desperately tapping my partner's arm trying to wake him without alerting the intruder. He wasn't waking up, and eventually I heard someone making their way up the stairs. I grabbed a nearby pair of scissors and waited to be confronted with this stranger, but as they walked into my room, they didn't. I could hear their footsteps continue into my room, but no person was connected to them. I froze in fear and listened to the footsteps stop next to the wardrobe, then they disappeared. We moved out shortly after for unrelated reasons, and over the years the activity seems to have gotten worse. My family constantly hears each other talking, or calling out for one another, even though it wasn't us. For example, I heard my daughter clear as day say, "Hey," right behind me the other week, so I said hey back. Of course she was on the other side of the house. My daughter, 5 when this happened, went to get a plate from a low-down kitchen cabinet and told me she heard a man's voice in there saying, "Hello, I see you." I checked for any spaces that could lead to the neighbor's house through there and found nothing. Every night my daughter will now have night terrors. She never remembers them. She's afraid of going into certain rooms alone. Other rooms are fine. She'll regularly hear me calling to her and call back asking what's up. I tell her I never shouted her name, but she's convinced that it's me and I'm just messing with her. Now here's my mistake. I bought a Ouija board into the house after my grandma passed, out of curiosity, as I've never used one before. My daughter wanted to join and asked for a name. The planchette just spelled hi over and over, and when I asked, "Would you like us to go?" it said yes. So we stopped the game, but we forgot to say goodbye. I assumed any weird experience was either my imagination or my grandma coming to check in. So I welcomed it. Every noise or shadow I saw drifting across the hallway, I said out loud, "Hey, Grandma." Well, whatever happened an hour before writing this, it wasn't my grandma. I was having a bad dream. Nothing crazy, but I was walking around a town in the 40s/50s, eating boiled sweets and drinking awful coffee, when a man in a suit brushed up against my back. I took my backpack off to check nothing was wrong with it. The top had been opened, but nothing had been taken or left inside. I felt that was strange, but continued on my day. I visited the cinema and decided to get some food when I saw the same man. Coincidence, but we're in the same town, so it wasn't too strange. Until he bumped into me again, which didn't make sense as he had plenty of space. The room was huge. I took my bag off to inspect it, and this time he hurried off as though he'd put an explosive in my bag. It was open, but again, nothing in there. At this point I told myself to look at the clock. The time was all jumbled, and it reminded me I was dreaming, and I promptly woke up. As soon as I woke up I heard it, someone walking up the stairs. He was humming to himself, the same 3 notes over and over. I kept my eyes shut and tried to nudge my partner to wake him up. Again, he wasn't waking. I heard the man walk into the bedroom, come to my side of the bed. All things I could have written off, but then he moved part of the cover off me. I felt it. I felt the cold air hit my shoulder as the cover came off. I felt the sensation of the cover moving off me. I felt him standing close to me and heard him shifting the weight of his feet between each other. I was completely convinced there was a non-paranormal full-flesh human standing next to me, and that I needed to open my eyes and fight him, or I'm done. So I counted down and sprung open my eyes to be greeted by nothing. I shook my partner awake this time and told him everything. I was sweating and my heart was pounding at this point from the adrenaline of preparing to fight an intruder, and I was struggling to calm myself back down. He went back to sleep, and I sat here thinking back on the similarities between tonight's event and the one years ago in a different house. This one felt much more malicious. The man in my dream terrified me. He was tall and fairly skinny, in a gray suit that didn't seem to fit him properly. He looked a little disheveled and was maybe in his 40s. I got the feeling he used to work for a government agency, but either left or was fired. And he was so calm, but I felt this cruelty about him, just a completely cold person. I have a huge migraine, and there's no way I'm getting back to sleep, so if you made it this far, please let me know your thoughts. Is this just a mixture of old plumbing and my imagination, or is there something else I should consider here? My dreams often end up coming true a few weeks to a few months after I've had them. They're incredibly vivid, and I can figure out I'm in a dream pretty easily to influence whether I wake up or not. This one I just can't figure out. I don't recognize this man at all. Why was I in the 1940s, 50s? What was he trying to put in my bag? The whole thing has left me confused. I have for many years worked in a boutique hotel in a small town in Wales. It is an old building, probably the oldest business in town, having been there for at least 500 years. It neighbors a castle, and evidence suggests some form of hostelry has been on the site since the inception of our town. Anyhow, as I mentioned, it is a very old building, and can be slightly spooky when you're left on your own to close up the business at break of day. Among the various things that you have to do to close up the bar is turning certain lights off around the business. It is a 3-story building. The second floor houses the hotel rooms. It is a bigger building than it appears on the exterior, with a great amount of winding corridors. At the top of the stairs on the second floor is the ladies' toilet, which overlooks a function room. At the end of every night, among my duties revolves around turning the lights off in those toilets. It is a strange and eerie room, and to complete my task it always goes the same way. I enter, turn off the first light, then the second, then I run from the room with a cold chill on my neck, hairs standing on end before I turn the final light off and run down the stairs. I know, weird, right? Maybe I'm just being superstitious. That's what I thought until one night I talked to my colleagues. We had gathered after a hard night at work around my colleague's house to smoke cigarettes, drink beer and watch television, reflecting on the busy evening. I piped up telling them how I hated turning the lights off in the ladies' toilets and my routine of the chill on my neck running from the room. They looked at me dumbfounded, stating that they do the exact same thing. This is the first time we'd talked about the matter, and independently between the three of us, we found we engaged in the exact same behavior and were equally weirded out by this seemingly ordinary rest room. I have tried to do some independent research into this matter, A rumor going around way back when is that the structure that is now a lavatory was once an apartment, and that the woman living there, a long-term resident, had died. I cannot clarify this, as it's been a while since I heard this story. I can't remember who told me it. I asked my boss if he'd ever seen anything, but informed me that in his 30-plus years on the property, he had never encountered anything abnormal. There is a picture of a woman in the adjoining function room, but my employers are not sure who it is a picture of. It may just be a junk picture acquired from a charity shop. Furthermore, we have had some odd incidents over the years concerning this room. Disregarding my sheepishness about this toilet, there are several occurrences from hotel visitors have arisen over the years. The first is fairly innocuous. In the middle of a busy shift, I received a phone call on the business line from a lady who claimed to have stayed in the building a few days prior. She said she had encountered some odd things during her stay and wanted to know if the building was haunted. I was very busy at the time and didn't have any time to pry. I informed her I did not know and hung up. On another occasion, we had another lady claiming to be a psychic, stating there was a presence in the lavatory. She gave the reason for why I and my other male co-workers felt uncomfortable in said toilet was because it was a female space, and that the being that resided there did not approve of us entering. Another lady visiting claimed to see a woman dressed in Victorian clothing whilst visiting the lady's room. She said she was not frightened by the experience. I'm not sure if she was winding me up or was being honest. Finally, we had an incident of a woman visiting the bathroom. She went upstairs for around 40 minutes. Then there was a large thudding sound, as if someone had fallen over. She came down distraught. I asked what was wrong. She told me that she had exited a cubicle having done her business to find herself in pitch dark. She wouldn't say anything more on the matter and was visibly shaken. So that's about it really. I find myself in an odd position, as I do not believe in ghosts but cannot deny that the ladies' toilets in my place of work are indeed haunted. I cannot rationalize this, but something creepy is going on in this old business. I'll tell you this much, my colleagues and I avoid this area when we can. It is an unnerving place to enter, especially late at night when you're all alone. I worked at a major supermarket near one of the major skirmish points from the Battle of Atlanta during the U.S. Civil War. We joked that we had a ghost many times as we would open coolers and find that something from a shelf was sitting in the middle of the floor. Regardless of where some items were, even against the back wall, we would find them placed front and center. Other times we would have the swinging traffic doors out of the department slam open, but there would be no one, and no amount of airflow would cause them to move on their own. Things would go missing literally after we turned our backs to it, but it would reappear a bit later, having maybe moved an inch. It was all in good fun, until whatever was there ran across a new employee. It did not like her whatsoever, but then again neither did anyone else. Horrible personality. We rolled our eyes as she was pretty paranoid, but then we started seeing glimpses of things over the next 2 years. While placing things on a peg rack, she finished, and we heard the collapse of one rack after another. She was adamant that she hadn't overloaded them, and when we cleaned things up, she was right. Some had even been empty, and the pegs were designed to not CME out of those holes unless forcibly bent or maneuvered in the correct way. She had shelves collapse on her for no reason. In one case, a little wooden shelf for rolls had all 3 shelves drop as she approached to fill them. It was usually pretty easy to dislodge the cheap little metal holders and cause one shelf to drop, but they would fall with the shelf. When we went to help, she still had not touched the fallen shelves. However, the metal holders were still in place and unmoved. The big one was the one I witnessed while standing right next to her. We were grabbing backstock to put out, and she exclaimed, "OW," and I heard smething plastic hit the floor. A plastic bottle of sauce had fallen from a shelf behind her and right above her head. I shrugged it off. Then another, "OW," and the sound of something hitting the floor. A package of empty plastic containers. At this point, she is looking around to see if there is anything. I take a step back and look as well. It's possible things were on the lip of the shelves and just fell due to movement, being bumped, etc. Soon enough I hear another, "OW," and there is a big full jug of oregano now on the floor, and her back is to the empty space on the shelf. She begins to swear and ask if I see this. I nod, but assure her it's probably logical. She claims there is something here, and it has been out to get her. She then invokes the name of Christ that she will not be harmed by any spirit. At this point, as I am watching, a full box of styrofoam drink cups, which was sitting flat on the top shelf against the wall, moved in an alarming diagonal line with some force. It beamed her square in the head. She shut up, and I moved her out of the shelves and told her to get some water and air. Best to get some space. Turned back and nothing. I finished grabbing the stuff and nothing. My coworker would transfer to another store soon afterward. Then things settled down again. Occasional pranks, but nothing targeted on anyone from my department at least. Another story from my friend to share. I worked as an event server/bartender in a gorgeous historical building that is one of the oldest in my downtown area, 150 years old. The restaurant group that I worked for owned a portion of the large building. Their operations spanned over 3 floors. For especially busy events, I would have to use the dishwasher in the basement level, where there is an adorable little bakery. The building was so beautifully restored and full of life that I never thought about it being haunted, until the resident ghost decided to make herself known to me one night. One particularly busy evening, I was minding my own business, washing some dishes alone in the basement. I was still relatively new, so I hadn't fully explored that level yet. As I was washing, something knocked on the wall. It was a playful, distinctly human knock. It sounded exactly like knuckles on drywall. My stomach dropped, as it was all dark on that floor, and I knew I should have been alone. I turned off the water and cautiously walked to the room sharing a wall with the dishwasher. I flung open the door, hoping to see a hot water heater or HVAC responsible for the noise, but it was just a mostly empty room. Out of curiosity, I opened all of the other doors nearby, which turned out to be empty bathrooms. After convincing myself that the knocking was a water pipe in the wall or something, I returned to the dishwasher. Before I could turn on the nozzle, there was very distinct, urgent knocking coming from the inside of the wooden bathroom doors. I noped the fuck right out of there, and I could feel something chasing on my heels, right on my neck, all the way back through the second floor up until I saw living people again on the third. I walked straight up to a girl that was an assistant manager down in the bakery that happened to be serving that event and asked, "Is there a fucking ghost in the bakery?" Her face turned white and her jaw dropped open and she blurted out, "Yes. OMG. We really need to find some time to talk about this." I never did get her story, as it was too busy of a night and she left before we closed, but the Vietnam veteran face she made when I asked her that question told me that she had obviously seen some shit. That night closing up, I also approached my no-nonsense boss lady and asked her straight up if she had any paranormal experiences in the building. She scoffed and said, "Oh, definitely. I've seen a full-body apparition of a little girl playing under the tables in the event space late at night several times." From that day on, I had to either sing at the top of my lungs while in the basement or address the little girl directly and ask her to leave me alone to feel at peace down there. She still chased me up the stairs to the third floor a few times, but thankfully there were no more knocking incidents. I didn't work there, but my mother had a coworker who owned a fancy restaurant with her husband. The restaurant building was a historical home in Monroe, North Carolina. It was the Blakeney House. Story goes that there are a few ghosts that haunt the house. Mr. Blakeney, his daughter who died suddenly when she was a child, and a servant who apparently fell to her death when she slipped down the servant's staircase. I think she is known as the Woman in Red, if I recall correctly. My mom's coworker told her a bit of backstory about the house, in addition to the deaths of the ghosts that supposedly haunted the house. Apparently, all the businesses that had attempted to set up shop had failed. Not one could stay in business. There were also stories from restaurant patrons about seeing an older man in period clothing, walking or sitting in random spots. One patron became irritated and complained to the owner of an older man sitting at another table, staring at her. Of course, when she came back to her table, the man in the room was gone and she never saw him again. The owner claimed she never sat an older gentleman in the room. Another story was a female patron was outside on the front porch, and she claimed that an older man in period clothing slowly walked past her, and she didn't pay no mind, thinking he would go up the other set of steps on the side of the house, but she claimed that he literally vanished. Like she saw him, then she didn't. Another story was a patron who absolutely refused to go into one of the upstairs rooms for dining. She went upstairs, but one of the rooms she just absolutely, flat out refused to sit in. She said something was off about it. Even the owner had a story about when her and her husband bought the place. They brought their dog with them while they were doing some renovating, and she said the dog stopped at the staircase, and the dog whimpered and whined, and of course, refused to go up the steps. Other things were that the restaurant was always cold, despite them having several heating and air technicians come out and look at the ducts and the heating and AC units. They had electrical issues, with lights flickering, and even randomly going out while patrons were dining. I am sure this would have been scary when the sun was down. LOL. They had many electricians who all approved of the setup, and of course they were up to code. I actually went there for my birthday dinner when I was 17. I didn't see a ghost at all, but I did see other interesting things. For starters, it was freezing in the restaurant. We even ate with our coats on. It was January. The lights flickered at one point, even almost going out when the owner was talking to us about Mr. Blakeney. The owner showed my brother and I a spot on the ceiling toward the kitchen area that looked like an embossed footprint. It was light, but at just the right angle, you could definitely see a footprint. She claimed that it was there when they bought the house, but they had that spot completely cut out and removed, and replaced with brand new sheetrock. She said over the course of a year, it started to become prominent. According to the owner, the original footprint was very noticeable, no matter where you stood under it. The owner took us upstairs and showed us the room where the one patron refused to go into. I didn't feel anything at all, but my brother said he felt kinda on edge, like there was an unease in the room. In that same room was a closet. Inside of it was a trunk. She said that her and her husband never opened the trunk. Supposedly it was around when Mr. Blakeney owned the house. Eventually, once she had left us alone, my brother and I did open the trunk, but there was nothing but 2 big tin canisters and a very old-looking canvas tarp in it. The owner also showed us the staircase to the attic, which is where the servant would sleep. The staircase was freaky. Even looking up to the attic area from the bottom felt like you were peering into infinite darkness. Literally no light reached up to it, like you couldn't even see the door. Even the owner said she had never stepped foot in the attic because when she tried, she made it about halfway up, and she just had a sinking feeling and couldn't do it. Then she took us down the servant's staircase. I can definitely see how one could fall to their death. There was a feeling of vertigo as I went down it. It just felt tight and claustrophobic. Once I reached the bottom, it felt like my chest just opened up and I could breathe again. Interesting side story. Apparently one of the employees supposedly caught a flash of a reddish garment on the staircase out of the corner of her eye. Patrons were not permitted to use the servant's case because it led right down to the front door of the kitchen, and employees were coming in and out, so it was a hazard for patrons to use. Plus, it was in the back of the house, far away from the dining rooms, so no one really had any reason to be back there. Well, when the employee began to focus her attention to what she assumed was a patron on the staircase, suddenly, it was gone. There was no one on the staircase. After exploring the house with my brother, my family split a cake and we left. It was a beautiful house, and I wanted to go back there, but it was a fine dining restaurant, so we didn't have the means to be good patrons. It is a place that has stayed in my mind for nearly 20 years. Unfortunately, the restaurant went under. The curse of failing businesses also hit them, sadly. Now, the building is run by some sort of Christian group. Of course, the newspaper did a story on it, and asked them if anything strange happened there. The group said that nothing has happened, no ghosts, no things that go bump in the night is there. A few years ago, I worked custodian 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. at an elementary school. Due to poor management, our company had employees leaving almost monthly. By October of that school year, I was by myself in the elementary school/attached district office building from 6 p.m. until 11 p.m. The school was built in the 50s and was the area high school until the high school built a new building next to it, attached by a long hallway. This school was then one of 3 elementary schools in the city, but structurally was the worst. Leaking ceilings, poor plumbing, asbestos everywhere, the worst electrical wiring you've ever seen, etc. That's why it was being torn down. My first night on the job in this school, once the other night custodian quit, I was cleaning the district office, and I kept getting this feeling that someone was behind me. It was only 4 p.m. and still light out, so I figured someone was lingering after the school day, but it was empty. In one particular dead-end hallway in the district office, I had the intense feeling that someone was behind me, blocking the way out of the hallway. It didn't feel malicious, more like when a friend is sneaking up behind you to jump out and scare you for laughs. I half-jokingly brought it up to the day custodian the next day when I came in, and without missing a beat she says, "Oh, that's Gordy. He was the custodian here for years, but died a few years ago." It sounded like she was pulling my leg, but that feeling of being watched in the district office never left the rest of the school year. I had to make it priority to clean the district office before it got dark because it freaked me out. I was chatting with another employee soon after that first day, He ended up quitting about a month later, again, cruddy management. I told him I had to get to the district office before it got dark. He cut me off to say, "I refuse to clean that place. It feels like someone's standing behind you." I was shocked because I hadn't mentioned why I didn't like the district office before that, but he seemed to have the exact feeling I did. As the school was getting ready for demolition, they started early on easier things, taking out lockers in the old locker rooms and tearing down the hallway that connected the elementary school to the high school. Once the hallway was demolished, things started picking up. At night now, in the double glass exit doors, I would see my reflection and my second reflection in the doors behind the first ones. And sometimes I'd see a third, taller shadow behind me. I quickly learned to just keep my eyes on the floor when walking through the halls at night. The school was rigged with some shit electrical sockets/light switches. One classroom you'd need to flip the switch on, go clean another classroom, and come back in time for the lights to actually turn on in the first room. Because of this, many rooms had newer motion-sensing lights installed when the switches went to shit. But there were many times that the motion lights would turn on behind locked doors, like in the teacher's lounge or a locked bathroom, but they'd be empty when I checked. By this time it was December, and there was no avoiding cleaning the district office after dark. While in the district office one night, the motion light in the bathroom at the end of the dead-end hallway flipped on, but I was nowhere near it. To test it out, I let it shut off and waited 10 minutes-ish while cleaning, then went to see if I could have tripped it from where I was in the hallway. I waved, danced around, had to get closer and closer, but the light didn't switch on until I was fully in the middle of the bathroom, not even visible from where I was in the hallway. Another night I heard footsteps/shoe squeaks in the dark gym clear as day, but when I stepped inside and the motion lights turned on, there wasn't anyone there. Then the footsteps started. I would hear footsteps/keys rattling in hallways that were empty when I ran to check. Sometimes teachers would come in at night if they forgot something, but they usually made their presence known by shouting out a hello, waving, or just by having their classroom light on. But to hear keys/footsteps in a hallway I just left that I know was empty was jarring. Even worse, I started noticing that loud activities after 9 p.m. like floor scrubbing or playing my speaker either increased the footsteps or that feeling of being watched in the district office. But now it was all over the school and following me. One night in February, now the only elementary school employee after 6 p.m. since everyone else quit, I was cleaning bathrooms. The girls' bathroom light wouldn't turn on no matter how much I flipped the switch or left it and came back. Because I couldn't clean in pitch black, I sent a Snapchat of me flicking the switch. Soft switch, didn't make a click noise. To the day custodian, proving I wasn't trying to get out of cleaning a bathroom for nothing. And to one of my old co-workers who quit saying shitty bathroom wiring won't turn on lights. I didn't get a response from the day custodian, but my old co-worker sent back, "What's that noise?" "It sounds like a stall door is slamming." But I didn't hear any noise when I was playing with the switch. By March I hated this school. The footsteps, the feeling of being followed, the figures in the windows/doors, hated it. At one point, I found myself Googling how to sage a place that I couldn't burn sage in. Sometimes people from around the school district would bring up spooky stuff from their experiences in the school when they'd catch me on lunch or something. A high school office worker used to work at the district office and would hear the bells jingle on the locked door as if someone opened it, or heard giggles in the district office at midnight when she was behind on work one night. The office woman for the elementary school had heard the school's old and defunct fire alarm ring one night, but just one bell and not the newer system. But that could have easily been the school's shitty wiring. I spent my lunches with my co-worker who worked in the adjacent high school. One night he said he was done at the high school, but we had to stay clocked in until 11 p.m. in case people needed in for whatever reason. I told him to come hang out with me at the elementary school while I finished, then. As we were shutting off lights at the end of the night, he was shutting off the last hallway lights that were opposite from the exit. Walking through the hall, he stopped with the most confused look on his face and stepped into the bathroom. The boys' bathroom next to the girls' bathroom with the stall door noise that one night. I asked him what was up when he came out looking just as confused, and he said, "I just heard a kid's voice saying, 'Where are you going really fast?'" He absolutely could have been pulling my leg as I'd told him how I hated the school, but he and I are still close friends now, and he's still serious and adamant that that's what he heard 3 years later. By April our company was going to crap. Our supervisor was told he was being canned, and we were given the unofficial notice that our cleaning company wasn't being rehired by the school district. I don't blame them. 2 employees in 2 schools cleaning all classrooms, bathrooms, hallways, common areas, meeting rooms, and computer labs, as well as snow removal and event staff. Things weren't looking great on the cleanliness side. I found a new job and left by mid-April. As the school was being demolished at the end of May, I truly didn't care that much. I posted this on another forum, so sorry if you read this already. I have a few stories, but I'll start with this one. When I was 5, my mother, younger brother, and I moved out of my grandparents' house. My mom and stepdad bought a house literally around the corner from my grandparents. I grew up in an old Philadelphia neighborhood with a lot of history and was originally called Point No Point. The houses were row homes, so if you walked out the back door there was an alleyway and 5 houses on the other side was my grandparents' house. Down the opposite end was a huge cemetery. The homes were built in the 1800s, so they were brick and brownstones. I'm an early 80s baby, so you know the decor was creepy too. So we moved in, and immediately I didn't like it. BC, I missed my grandparents' house. I was a very sensitive child and was afraid of everything. I was very shy too, so I kinda happy I met a new friend because most of the kids on the block were older than me. His name was Thomas, and that's my stepdad's name, so I thought he was related or something. But the only time I would see him was down the basement under the steps, and we would sit there and play jacks and shoot marbles. My mom only took me down the basement when she did laundry, which was a lot. BC, she had another baby shortly after we moved in. My younger brother never wanted to go down there, so my mom would intermittently walk up and down steps, leave me there for a few minutes while I was playing. It was summer. BC, my mom had the baby in July. My mom would get mad that I wanted to play in basement when it was summer. She thought the Thomas the First was talking about was my stepdad. That September I started kindergarten, so I wasn't playing in the basement as much. I think I forgot about him. BC of school, and I made new friends. So one day my asked me to grab my uniform. I went to Catholic school from the basement. As I was walking back up the steps, I saw Thomas through the holes of the steps. He was angry and crying, saying, "I just want to go out and play." So I go upstairs and ask my mom if Thomas can come out and play. She brushes it off and says he's at work. I remember saying, "No, he's under the steps." So another few years goes by, and my mom has another baby, and she names him Thomas after my stepdad. So I'm like 8 or 9 at this time. And again I'm down the basement to get my uniform for school. I see Thomas under the steps again. I knew something was wrong. BC, I was older, and he still looked 5. So again he's angry and crying, "I just want to go out and play." So I run up the steps and tell my mom Thomas is under the steps. I guess she thought I was talking about my brother, so she went down there, but she didn't see anything but marbles and jacks under the steps. She yelled at me for lying and for leaving marbles and jacks on the floor. BC, it's a choking hazard for baby. After that I never saw Thomas again. Years go by, and my brother Thomas has some imaginary friends, 3 to be exact. One is named Thomas, the other are George Rink and Johnny Boggs. I kid you not, those were the names. He said Thomas only stays in basement, but George and Johnny play everywhere with him, even outside. I'm like 12 at this time. I think it's hilarious. Then I remember I had a friend named Thomas who liked to play in the basement too. So my house was always a crazy place. I was the oldest and only girl out of 5 kids. So my mom would always be yelling even from all rooms basement. She would yell our names, Joanna, Thomas. Well, Patrick, Eric, and would always get an eerie feeling behind steps. One day while she doing laundry, and a marble comes rolling towards her from under the steps. She looked and nothing was there. So fast forward like another few years, I'm probably 16. Will is 14, Eric is 11. Thomas is 9, and my youngest brother Pat is 7. So it's early morning. My mom is making lunch for my brothers for school. Out of corner of her eye, she see my brother walking up basement steps. They too wear uniforms for Catholic school, buttoning his shirt, and she says, "Oh good, you're up." Then 10 minutes later, all my brothers come downstairs from their room not dressed. She's freaking out like, "Weren't you just down the basement?" They were like, "No, we were sleeping." So she tells me the story later when I get home from school. I ask her, "Don't you remember my friend Thomas from the basement when I was little?" She goes on to say, "I thought you were talking about Big Tommy." And then I mentioned Tommy's imaginary friends. Then she started really thinking about it, that she noticed every time she was down the basement, she felt something watching her, or something move past her, like when she was walking up the basement steps. So again she saw a little boy from the back, and thought it was my youngest brother, but he turned around to saw it wasn't him. She jumped back. Her heart was beating in her chest. It was a little boy around 5 with light brown hair and blue eyes. He was weary old-time overalls. He was very dusty and dirty. He didn't really even look like a ghost. He looked like a normal person, but as he came into the sunlight, she could see he was transparent. He wasn't threatening or anything. She then asked him, "What do you want?" And he ran to the back door and said, "I just want to go out and play." And he walked out the back door. She never saw him again, and neither did I or my brother Tommy. Sorry, I'm not the best at explaining the details, but I swear this is a true story. I've had paranormal experiences throughout my life, but the scariest was when my little brother was 6 and I was 25, and we moved into a modern home my mother and stepfather still live in. The day we moved in, I was sat on the toilet LOL, and I hear something clatter to the floor. I presume it's my earring or something, but I looked down to find a child's milk tooth. There was nowhere for it to jump off, and I thought weird, but didn't pay too much attention. However, months later I was awoken by a little boy shouting "boo" in my ear. Even that, I passed off as a dream until the same thing happened to my mom, and we realized we'd experienced the same thing. My little brother began to complain about seeing 3 gray figures stood at the end of his bed every night just watching him. He insisted on keeping his door ajar, so he could have the light/noise filter in from the rest of the household. To be honest, we didn't take much notice, as for some reason we didn't put all the activity together until years later. Poor kid. Around this time I got very interested in developing psychic gifts, which probably wasn't a good thing. It's a long story, but I had a crush on a little-known session musician at that time, and his address literally popped into my head one day. This was pre-internet, and I nearly fainted when directory inquiries gave me his number, and yes, I rang, and he sent me some signed CDs, which was pretty cool. I started to have out-of-body experiences where I definitely wasn't just dreaming. I'd find myself in the hall knowing I was out of my body, and hearing the TV in the living room or on the street outside. That scared me the most. I also began to suffer sleep paralysis. One day I woke up and I literally felt myself fall through the bed. I braced, expecting to hit the floor, but then suddenly it felt as if I was floating on the sea. That was a pleasant experience. My mother then saw a man walk up the garden in broad daylight. The only way in was through the house, so it wasn't a living person, plus it was only later she realized he'd made no sound on the gravel. My middle brother would hear the piano playing downstairs when everyone was out. He used to wait until we came home before he dared come down. A very unnerving experience was when I was left to house sit when the rest of the family went on holiday. I was making tea and I heard our dog growling ferociously from the living room. So ferociously I thought someone must have broken in, so I grabbed a knife and crept through where I found her lunging at a spot midway up at the wall. I had to drag her away. Several dogs the family have owned over the years have also growled at something we couldn't see on the stairs. The family also began to see a ghost dog just before a family pet died. My husband even saw it in our home after I moved 100 miles away, just before my brother's dog unexpectedly had to be PTS, and he hadn't been told of this strange omen. We've also heard a bell chime in the house several times and children's music books start to play in the middle of the night, which was very creepy. Several photos we took in that house continued to develop after they'd been developed, which was unexplainable. My mother would also feel someone walk past her many a time when she was washing up, the sink being right next to the back door. I did some research on the estate, and years ago it was farmland with the farmhouse not far from where the houses now stand. I think it's also worth noting my mother and stepfather had a very toxic relationship, and I wonder if the negativity attracted or fueled such experiences. I worked at a veterinarian, so around animal deaths instead of people deaths, so a bit different than other stories here. Also, it's a long story. When was a teenager, worked at a veterinarian clinic that also boarded animals. Had the keys and worked alone at night after they closed and in the morning before they opened. So it was usually dark. Cleaned up the whole place, top to bottom, sweep, mop, disinfect, laundry, refill meds, etc. Basically got everything clean and ready for when it was open. Also took care of all the animals. Walked the dogs, did the litter boxes, cleaned the cages of all the animals, fed and watered them, gave them meds, etc. Usually stayed a bit after, was done just to play and cuddle with them too. Some days there were tons of animals, and all the cages were full, and some days they didn't have any animals, and just had to get the office clean. The way the office was situated was a long office. There was a front door that led to the front waiting room, then 2 doors at the back of that room that led to the 2 rooms, one on each side, where the vet saw the patients. Then a door at the back of those rooms that led to one bigger room with sinks, meds, and stuff. Then a door at the back of that led to the grooming area and the area with cat and other small animal cages. Then the operation room, and finally the back, which was half utility and half the dog cages and dog runs. Then a door that led to the outside where the office backed into a park where walked the dogs. It's kind of hard to explain. So it was a long office with connecting doors to the next room that led to the next room, then swinging doors and the next room, etc. Coming in the front, and you couldn't see the back or past the closed doors to the next room. But the dogs could hear you from the back, and you could hear them going crazy. Never knew coming in how many animals were there until got to the back. One day came in, and it was quiet, no barking, but could hear the unmistakable clicking sound of nails from a big dog walking around on the tile floors in the back somewhere. Just thought that one of the dogs had gotten out and was walking around. No big deal, but needed to go get him, her, and get them back in the cage. Walked to the back and didn't see anything in the first room, so kept going because could still hear the click-clacking of nails walking around on the floor. So went to the next room. Nothing. Then the next. Nothing. As a matter of fact, there were no dogs that day at all. The cages were empty. Was freaking out because could still hear it. When was in the back, it sounded like it was coming from the front, and vice versa. Looked everywhere, but there were no dogs anywhere. Was freaking out because couldn't find it, but wasn't really scared. Felt nothing ominous or ill-intentioned or anything. Finished cleaning, and went home making sure locked up really well. The next morning, stayed after was done so could talk to the people when they came in to open up for the day. Told them about it, and they didn't seem surprised at all. The receptionist was like, "That's just Sadie. There's nothing to worry about." She took me to the refrigerator, and on top of it was a wooden box I had never noticed. It was a box of ashes with the name Sadie on it. Apparently years before was working there, an older couple was driving through the city on the way to visit relatives, and their dog got sick. They pulled off the highway to the closest veterinarian they could find, my work. But unfortunately the dog died despite the veterinarian doing everything they could. She was an older dog with health issues. The couple was sad, of course, but had to continue on the way. So they paid to have their dog cremated, and were going to pick her ashes and earn up on the way home. However, they never came back, and the office could never get a hold of them, so the veterinarian just kept the ashes in the office. Guess just in case they ever came back. Since then, every once in a while people that worked there would hear a dog walking around, or see a dog out of the corner of their eyes, and they just assumed it was the ghost of Sadie. Apparently Sadie was a nice dog, and her ghost was too, and there was never any evil or nefarious feelings associated with her. Only worked there a little bit after that, and never saw her again, but do think she was a nice spirit that just liked to play with people, and didn't want to be alone sometimes, so when there were no other animals there she came out to say hi to the people.